Hello. Today I thought we would talk about red dots versus irons, specifically with a new shooter on a red dot gun with backup irons. Which sighting system do you start them out first on? So, at first glance, it might seem pretty obvious. Hey, the red dot's the primary sighting system. You should start them out on that. And I agree. That is actually the conclusion that I've arrived at. But it wasn't always that way where I work, and I know it's still not that way in some other programs. They still start them out on irons for various reasons. Some of which being like, well, they got to learn to shoot irons first before they get the red dot. Like they got to learn the hard one first before we give them the easy way out. And I don't really think that that's an intelligent approach to teaching how to shoot a handgun. First off, I mean, the red dot's the primary sighting system, so teach the primary sighting system. The irons are on there as a backup. They should be treated as such. Should they be trained? Yeah, they should be trained. But why spend a bunch of extra time working on those when you can teach them the red dot and the irons as the backup, because that's exactly what they're there for. I think teaching and introducing the red dot first makes a lot more sense. The reason being, like where I work, the first thing we teach is vision. So the first thing we introduce is, hey, the concept that you got to pick a small spot on the target. The gun has to have a destination, and you've got to mark the destination with your eyes before the gun can ever arrive there. So we got to pick a small spot out on the target. And then we start, like the first things we work on is an index, building an index, the ability to bring the gun up and have it arrive exactly where you're looking. If they index a red dot well, the irons will show up for them no problem. But as we've seen, and anybody who's ever transitioned from irons to a red dot, and in all the red dot transition classes I've taught, it does not necessarily work the same way in reverse. Somebody who's been shooting irons for a long time, or somebody who learns irons first, also has to learn how to index a red dot. So why double your work? You can teach it all by just learning how to index the red dot, and then the irons kind of take care of themselves. I think that's a better approach. Also, with a new shooter, we are working on trying to teach them not only how to be target focused and how to maintain that target focus, but be aware of what's going on with the sighting system. So, like, what's my red dot doing in recoil? What is that telling me about my grip and my grip pressures and the input on the gun? All of those things are a lot easier to see with a red dot. Why? Well, it's a single focal plane piece. A bouncing red ball is a lot more informative. It's a lot louder visually than like a set of black irons or black with like a green or red fiber. And I think it's also more intuitive for pretty much everybody at this point. And like almost everybody is either like very, very familiar with using a mouse, or they grew up using a mouse from the time they can remember. It's technology that they were born into. So the idea that I look to a spot and then I have this pointer thing show up at the spot I'm looking at is very, very intuitive to all the recruits that we're getting in now. So it doesn't take them a long time to understand the concept behind look, have the dot show up. There we go. Now I just pull the trigger without influencing the gun. That's very intuitive and easy for them to understand. Less so with an idea that I've got to align these two items with like an equal height, equal light. There's more going on here. And then I've got to put this system as it relates to itself over that. And then I've got to make sure they all stay lined up in relation to the target piece that I'm looking at. So if we can teach them on the red dot, then it just makes it easier to apply the same concepts to irons. So where I work, we teach all iron shooting as target focused, at least back to like 15 or 20 yards. And then we tell them if they need to at that point, they can start maybe checking in with the front sight and double checking things. But 15, 20 yards and in, we want them to be target focused with the irons. And so we teach target focus with the red dot. And then the way we work irons in is we just turn the red dot off, have them shoot the same drills with irons, turn the red dot back on, shoot it again, turn it off, shoot with irons, move on to the next drill. We just kind of flop back and forth. So the lessons they're learning, like how is my gun behaving? Is my dot recoiling and returning predictably? And that's informing whether or not I'm staying connected to the gun. Am I over returning the gun, pushing on it too much, or changing my grip pressure. It's a lot easier to see input return issues over returning the gun with a red dot. But then once they've kind of cracked the code there, we just tell them to start applying that when they're shooting their irons. Because while the red dot is screaming that information at you, the irons are whispering. Same information. I like the same habits that you are falling into, the same shooting habits you're using shooting a red dot. It's the same thing that happens with the irons. It's just not quite as visually apparent, but the information is still there if you pay attention. And so you can use the red dot to kind of inform the irons, and I think it helps to bounce back and forth. In a lot of cases, there's lessons to be learned in both ways. But it's easier to figure out those lessons and understand exactly what they're looking for, especially from a self-assessment standpoint, with a red dot. And especially with a new shooter who's also trying to learn all of the pieces involved with getting a consistent, durable, stable grip, staying target focused, pressing on the trigger without changing anything or putting input into the gun. It's a lot of things to pay attention to, and then also having to try to figure out how the iron system works. I think it's just easier to give them the red dot sighting system so that there's less to think about, so they're not quite so overloaded. Occasionally I'll get asked, why do we even still require irons on the guns with red dot? Like, why do we require backup irons? And I mean, it's a valid question. I think it's far more valid now than it was maybe 5 years ago. 5-6 years ago, dots were still coming off guns all the time. Screws were breaking. Mounting plates weren't as good. We have more electronics failures and hardware failures than we do now. And 5 years from now, it might be a very serious conversation on whether or not irons even need to be on a gun, because the dots have become just so robust and durable. But as far as today goes, most agencies that I'm aware of and the folks that I've talked to require backup irons. The place I work, we still require backup irons. But it's not really because we see a lot of failures. The dots that we use, we authorize a list. We're an individual officer purchase program, so officers own their own handguns and they own their own dots, and they have to choose both from an approved list. The ones we approve are reliable. They're reputable. They work great. We don't see a lot of failures. If we are going to see a hardware or electronics failure, it is generally in the first 4,000 rounds during like their academy program. We have not seen a single dot failure during a shooting or a critical incident that I'm aware of. I looked into it and I kind of asked everybody around the shop, and nobody can think of a time where we've had one fail during an incident. It's always been kind of on the range or in training. And even then, it's a very, very low likelihood. We don't see a lot of failures at all. We've even had guns dropped or slides that got dropped and they cracked the optic. And in every case where the glass was cracked, the dot still worked. It held zero. They were able to finish the qual, the training day, the training program, whatever was going on that day, they were able to finish without any issues at all. And then we were able to get the dot replaced after that. So we haven't seen a lot of failures. The reason that the irons still have to be on there is because some cops just aren't good at changing their batteries. So we tell our folks, hey, pick a date once a year. New Year's Day, 4th of July, your birthday, your wife's birthday, your dog's birthday, whatever. Something that's going to be like familiar to you. Pick a day and change all the batteries in all of your gun optics, whether it's your duty gun, your concealed carry gun, your rifle. Change all the optics once a year. Because even though most optics will go 1 or 2, 3, 4 years without needing to be changed, if you start going more than a year, it gets to be really difficult to remember the last time you changed it, and then before you know it, it dies. That one day when you need it, you got to pull it out to go to work, you check your dot, and it's dead. Maybe you've got an extra battery, maybe you don't. So I can't count the number of times that I've seen guys come in for qualifications, pass the gun through the window for quick inspection, make sure everything's okay, go to turn their dot on, doesn't turn on. I'm like, hey man, your battery's dead. And they say something like, yeah, it died a couple months ago. I've just been running irons ever since. Like, you can put a new battery in there. Yeah, I just haven't gotten around to it. And because of that, because some cops just can't be trusted to maintain their gear and replace batteries, that's the real reason we need backup irons. It's not that irons never fail or that dots fail all the time. The dots are very reliable, and I have seen irons fail. I've seen guns dropped where the optic survived and the front sight broke, or the rear sight was drifted so far off the gun that it didn't work, or it broke the rear sight off of the dovetail. So I mean, the fact that irons can't fail is a complete myth, and it's totally bogus. But for now, at least until we get dots that last years and years and years and years, or indefinitely on a single battery or something like that, as long as there's cops that don't change their batteries, we're probably still going to have to mandate that they've got backup irons at least to mitigate those who, can't take care of their own gear. So anyway, that's why we start with red dots. I think it just makes a lot more sense. It's the primary sighting system anyway, and that's why we still require irons. If you guys have got some other questions or anything else you want covered, throw them down below. Anyway, I hope that helps. Take care.